Okay, next slide, please. Perfect. So welcome again to the introductory community webinar for the Charlestown Navy Yard and Little Mystic Channel Flood Resilience Planning and Feasibility Study. This is a critical initiative by the Coastal Resilient Infrastructure Delivery Team of the City of Boston Planning Department that we are implementing in partnership with the Office of Climate Resilience and federal agencies such as National Park Service, state agencies such as Massport, and other important agencies. We are very lucky to have an amazing team of consultants helping us out with this initiative. The team is led by Arcadis and supported by Consensus Building Institute, Woods Hole Group, Childs Engineering, and others. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce the city's Chief of Planning, Kairos Shen, and the city's inaugural Chief Climate Officer, Brian Sweat, for some opening remarks. Chief Shen, please take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be here to welcome all of you to this launch of this project that our climate resiliency infrastructure delivery team is going to share with you and engage with you on. I'm delighted that this team is made up of members of the planning department as well as the environment department under Chief Sweat and Chris Osgood. This project is an important commitment that the mayor has made to enhancing climate resiliency and climate justice and equitable adaptation. It's critical that we have your participation in shaping the resilient future of this part of the city in Charlestown. Many of you may have been involved with our department in helping to develop Plan Charlestown the last few years. And hopefully that you will help us make sure that this piece of the work is consistent with the open space recreation plan and other sort of planning goals that were defined within Plan Charlestown. Now, the idea is to put the Charlestown Navy Yard, the Little Mystic Channel project in a larger planning context. And in particular, the planning department has an added responsibility because we are the property owner and custodian for Charlestown Navy Yard. So we are especially interested in making sure that we can address the vulnerability that this has on property that we are custodians of. We also have the responsibility of making sure that our tenants in the Navy Yard are aware of what we're doing and actually that the resiliency that we are developing here, they can directly benefit from. We also need to make sure that we set standards for adaptation as property owners so that we can be a model property owner that other private property owners can follow. There's also an important aspect of in the Navy Yard, we're providing critical infrastructure that is more than just the Navy Yard and provides a larger district level flood protection and develop again strategies that can be applied to a larger district. And then, of course, this plan will actually make recommendations on how we allocate future capital construction and repair sort of strategies and budgets. I think, I'm very excited that this process is being launched. I want to also invite and pass the mic over to Chief Sweat so he can provide how a larger context of how this project falls within the larger context of the city's climate initiatives. So thank you again for attending. I look forward to continuing for you to continue to participate in this process. So Brian.
Thank you, Chief Shen. So happy to be here. Again, Brian Sweat, Chief Climate Officer for the City of Boston. As Chief Shen mentioned, this project is happening in the context of really the city having coastal resilience planning efforts across all 47 miles of our shoreline. And the Charlestown Navy Yard and the Little Mystic Channel are an example of the public-private partnership that is necessary across much of our coastline. The city only owns directly about 16% of our shoreline, with 30% owned by the private sector and 50% owned by the state, be it DCR, Massport, or other agencies, as well as a small portion owned by the federal government, obviously including portions adjacent to the Charlestown Navy Yard. And we know that in Boston, coastal resilience is not purely a coastal concern. 1/6 of our landmass is filled tidelands. So it impacts neighborhoods a fair distance from the coast, and is absolutely vital to the long-term success and vitality and life and safety of Boston, is how we protect ourselves from rising sea levels and tides. So excited to be kicking this off and seeing the planning efforts at this district scale. And I just remind folks that this is happening also in the context of broader U.S. Army Corps of Engineers studies around solutions for the flood paths of the late 2040s, 2050s, and beyond, and the federal government's look at investments that they can make on our shoreline that this can build upon as well. So there'll be more to come on that in the coming months in Charlestown as well. But excited to see this kick off and engage with the community. With that, I will turn it back to Ksenia.
Thank you so much, Chief Sweat, Chief Shen, for this introduction. I also want to acknowledge the fact that we're going to hear from Rich McGinnis later today. He's the Deputy Director for Climate and Coastal Resilient Infrastructure Delivery with the Planning Department, and he's also the director of this initiative. He's going to provide some closing remarks later on. Before we dive in, actually, I did want to ask if we have any elected officials in the room today or their representatives, and if we have any press joining us today as well. Elaine, yes, you with the office of Councilwoman Coletta Zapata, right?
Correct. Hi, I'm Elaine Donovan with Council Coletta Zapata. Just here to listen. Thank you.
Nice to have you. Great. Thank you for attending and thank you for your interest. Okay, so hearing none, let's dive in. Oh, so now that you've heard from us in terms of introductions of the team, it would be helpful for us to know who is in the room. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Patrick from the Consensus Building Institute for some icebreaker activity.
Great, Ksenia, thank you so much, and nice to see everybody tonight. We're going to use a tool called Slido kind of throughout this presentation so we can have some interaction and engagement. So the first one is going to be pretty straightforward, but the way you do this is you can either take your phone and kind of like put your camera on this and it'll give you a little thing to hit and it'll jump you to Slido. Or if you're on your browser on your computer, you can just type in slido.com and it'll ask for that code there, 5027814. So let's give people a minute to do that. And then you're not going to see anything yet because we haven't opened the poll, but in a second here you will. We'll give people a minute to do that. Let's go to the next slide. I'll just kind of show you. So on your phone, what you should see if it's on your phone is Slido will come up, you'll enter the code like that. And what will happen is you'll just see kind of this blank screen that says the product at the top and then nothing. But in a second here, when we open it, you'll be able to see that. So let's go to the next slide. So we still got the Slido. There we go. Okay, so what we're going to do is all we're asking you is where you're a resident of. To start, we're going to ask some more complicated questions as we go. So again, just put it in the phone or in your browser. We're going to give people a minute to do this. That number at the top shows how many folks have filled this out. We've got about 67 participants. Hopefully get a good response rate. So we'll give this just a minute as we go. People seem to be getting on this just fine. And if you have any questions, you can just put them in chat or raise your hand and we can try to help you out. And would love everybody to do it because we have some more substantive questions we're going to ask as we go on. I want to make sure we get feedback from everybody. All right. We've got probably, I mean, some of us are on the city team, so we're not responding, but probably have 50 or so folks. So see if we can get a few more in here before we see what the results are. All right. People are getting the hang of it. I like it. Okay, so, and again, we're going to use this again in a little bit when we get to some other questions, but so not surprising, and I think good, about 37%, a little bit more than a third are from the Navy Yard, and we've got about a third or a little bit less of other parts of Boston, and we've got a smaller number from other parts of Charlestown, and then some other from someplace else. So good to know. So again, that's our number, and again, as we kind of get our numbers up here, we're getting more from the Navy Yard. Makes total sense because that's the neighborhood we're talking about. All right, excellent. We're going to use that again. So go ahead and leave Slido open on your phone or on your browser. It will scroll forward when we get to the next question a little bit further in the presentation. So thank you for that. And I'm going to turn it back to Ksenia.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Patrick, and everybody. So meeting agenda, we have a really packed one tonight. So we are going to talk about the citywide resiliency efforts that the chiefs have already mentioned a bit, and how this project fits into this larger context specifically. We're going to talk about the motivation for this project. We're going to provide an overview of the project fundamentals, like budget, timeline, engagement plan, and we're also going to hear from you, about your flooding concerns and about the priorities that you see in the neighborhood and the needs, and all of this feedback is going to inform our design fundamentally later on. Next slide, please. Next slide. Perfect. So in Boston, we experience the effects of climate change on a daily basis. We're seeing rising sea levels and stronger storms, and they all pose a threat to our communities, to open spaces, to critical infrastructure, to community infrastructure, to buildings and whatnot. And these images of flooding from previous storms really underscore Boston's vulnerability to these threats. And you know better than anyone else that Charlestown Navy Yard and Little Mystic and Charlestown as a neighborhood in general are no exceptions here. Next slide. So what does the city of Boston do about it? We are acting on multiple fronts depending on the urgency of these flood risks. In terms of flooding that we are seeing today, we are prioritizing emergency response and preparedness. We are educating and doing outreach to the residents. We are providing adaptation guidance to property owners who are affected by flooding today. We are strengthening on our extreme weather protocols and improving coordination around those. And we're ramping up the use of deployable flood systems while we're building those longer term permanent measures. In terms of flooding that is going to materialize by the end of this decade, we are prioritizing the delivery of near-term projects that were identified in Climate Ready Boston and Coastal Resilience Solution planning initiative before. And while doing that, we are prioritizing the creation of open space, local neighborhood needs, and we are addressing equity concerns. And in terms of medium and longer term flooding risks, as Chief Sweat has already mentioned, we are working with the Army Corps of Engineers to complete and ultimately deliver the Coastal Storm Risk Management Plan. It's a comprehensive assessment of flood risks and potential flood management strategies in Boston that will help open up the city to direct federal funding. We are also developing innovative financing solutions that will help us bridge that gap between the scale of investment that we need to create that coastal infrastructure and the local, state, and federal monies that we have available for that today. And we're also continuing to address permitting and regulatory challenges that still persist. Next slide, please. So this slide is really an illustration of the fact that building resilience, coastal resilience in Boston is a puzzle that consists of many pieces. No department can do it alone. Every local, state, and federal agency plays its role and its part in planning and implementing resilience, coastal resilience solutions. And the city really sees one of its primary roles in ensuring coordination among all these agencies to expedite the delivery of the solutions. For example, we are coordinating with the Army Corps team on a daily basis for all our projects, ongoing projects, including this one. And the city is making sure that local needs are reflected in the core plans and that the right stakeholders are appropriately involved. Next slide, please. And this is another illustration of the resilience puzzle that we're putting together in the city of Boston. Coastal resilience is just a piece of a broader citywide effort to comprehensively address climate change in the way we design, build, and operate our city. It includes design and operations of cities' parks, urban forests, and open spaces. We integrate resilience standards into the way we review new buildings and in the way we design and operate our critical and community infrastructure, public rights of way, and much more. Next slide, please. So as of 2022, we have completed Climate Ready Boston and Coastal Resilience Solution planning for the entirety of the 47 miles of Boston coastline. This enabled us to prioritize our efforts across the city based on the urgency of the flood risk and on the vulnerability of our communities. We have many projects that are already underway across the city. They are shown in yellow on this map, and there are also projects in green that have already been completed, and you can actually go out and enjoy them on a daily basis because these projects happen to be beautiful parks and open spaces such as Langone Bolo Park in North End, Martins Park in South Boston, and McDonald Park in Dorchester. And our goal here today is to see more and more of these yellow dots turn green. And this is exactly why we are holding this event today and advancing our study of flood risk in Charlestown. Next slide. So our efforts in Charlestown have been guided by obviously the Climate Ready Boston initiative and Coastal Resilience Solutions for Charlestown and East Boston Phase 1 and Phase 2 from 2017 and 22, respectively. And my colleagues from Arcadis are going to go into more detail about how exactly we're building on those initiatives in our project today. Kate, to you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kate Edwards. I'm the project director for Arcadis and our consultant team here. And we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about the Charlestown neighborhood, the Little Mystic Channel area, and the Navy shipyard here, the Charlestown Navy Yard. So let's hop into the next slide and we'll talk about moving from, as Ksenia said, from planning into design and starting to head down the path of implementation, really building on the studies done in Charlestown previously. And the most recent of those is the Phase 2 study. This project is going to undertake a process that will refine those alternatives that were presented in that study, engaging residents and stakeholders along the way in evaluating those alternatives, select a preferred solution and move that solution towards more detailed design. And the steps we're planning to take are outlined here. We're going to answer some key questions like, what are the options we're considering? When would they be put into place? Will those options work? Which options are the best? What could the preferred option actually look like? And what is the greatest return for the cost in terms of the options laid out there? So we'll dive in a little bit more into some details and first consider the first key question, which is why undertake this project, right? Most importantly, we're undertaking this project because Charlestown, including the Navy Yard and Little Mystic waterfronts, are at risk of flooding both today and increasingly into the future. This was demonstrated in 2018 when the harbor water flooded the harbor walk during Winter Storm Grayson. And flooding like this will become more regular in the future due to climate change and sea level rise. So Charlestown is at risk of two types of flooding. The first is coastal flooding, which includes flooding due to wind and storms when the harbor is really pushed onto what is usually otherwise dry land, or tidal flooding when you have annual, monthly, or daily tides that overtop the shoreline, even on sunny days. And the second type of flooding we're looking at is the concern over stormwater flooding, or flooding caused by rainfall that's ponding in low-lying areas. And we know with climate change, increased rainfall and sea level rise may lead to more stormwater flooding here in the future. We also have, when it comes to coastal flooding, there's a couple terms you might hear tonight. Fringe flooding really impacts low-lying areas, mostly along the waterfront as the harbor water rises above the ground elevation. And flood pathways are similar, except they also impact inland areas. So impacting both the low-lying areas along the waterfront and starting to head into those neighborhoods as water rises. And much of Charlestown today is exposed to fringe flooding, but in the future, perhaps as soon as mid-century 2050, this fringe flooding could start to transition to flood pathways during storms. And that's what really is going to cause flooding on the interior portion of the neighborhood. So we're really also thinking through how we address stormwater and coastal flooding now and into the future. And so we want to flip to a few of these maps and walk you through what we're anticipating here. These maps help us illustrate the risk of flooding over time in Charlestown. They show what we would call the 100-year flood, or a flood that has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. This map here shows what the extent of flooding from a flood might look like as soon as 2030, but likely by mid-century. And we'll click through kind of the next few maps to see how this changes over time. Here's that same flood expected as soon as 2050, and you can see that at this point, a flood pathway opens up under the Tobin Bridge and expands into the low-lying areas of the neighborhood. And then by 2070, we see flooding throughout the Navy Yard, into the center of the neighborhood and along Little Mystic. So the long-term risk of flooding is pretty great here in Charlestown. And if we don't take action, the places we depend on for everyday well-being, like our homes, streets we use to get to work, the harbor walk where we exercise, where we get our food at the market, could be damaged or disrupted by storms and flooding. So this project really aims to think about what we can do about that. And the first thing we need to think about is that if we're going to reduce the risk of flooding here in Charlestown, it will require everybody to work collectively. As folks have alluded to already, property in Charlestown is owned by a mix of public entities like the City of Boston and federal government, as well as private owners. So working to address the long-term needs related to flooding in the neighborhood is going to be a collective action. And buy-in and support from all of you and all the stakeholders who stand to implement and benefit from these investments is really what's needed. So we're going to do our first Slido activity besides our icebreaker. So I'm going to let Patrick lead that.
Great. All right. So if you go to Slido again, and you should be hopefully just on your screen, we want to get a sense of which two flooding concerns, which flooding impacts you're most concerned about. And this is not a perfect list, but it's one we've heard from in some initial conversation we had with folks, and we want to get a sense of that. So we know it's not perfect, but we'd love to hear what you have to say. So again, you'll go to Slido. If you have it open, you should just see the poll there. If you closed it, you can reopen it with either the kind of the URL there or the code there at the top. And we want people to kind of pick their two. You can pick up to two, and we'll kind of see what people are concerned about in terms of impacts of the flooding that Kate just described. And we'll give people a minute to think that through. Oh, looks like maybe you can only pick one, so that's all right. We'll go ahead and pick one. We're forcing a top priority. Not that all things aren't important here, so sorry about that. I want to see, we got up to 40 some last time, so I'm hoping we get there again. Give it just another 10 seconds, see what we got here. All right, so for the folks who were able to fill this out, I think what we've got is a really strong result for I will lose property value. That seems like the top of mind concern to folks tonight. So I think really helpful for us to know that, what's on your mind, and very understandable. That would be a great worry. And then secondly, that there'd be displacement because of flooding, perhaps from your home for some time, and that would be of concern as well. And there are a number of other things that probably don't come as quite as strong, but they're still there. You know, will I have to pay for the property damage? Will I lose access to emergency services? I won't be able to get to work. So there's some other things that people are thinking about too. So really appreciate kind of the initial input about what your concerns are on your mind. And I think those top two come out pretty strongly. So it's sometimes nice when we see a pretty strong result. So thanks for that. And we'll come back to some further questions and comments as we go. So Kate, back to you.
Great. Thanks everybody for your input. I think we'll hop into a little bit more about what this project is, what types of projects it might result in, and what you can expect moving forward. So the project area shown here in yellow includes Charlestown Navy Yard to the east of the Boston National Historic Park, and the neighborhood along the Little Mystic Channel. So this is what we're thinking of as the project area. We're also working closely with the National Park Service next door on a separate but closely aligned study that looks at building and flood protection along the coastal parts of the National Historical Park site. So we'll talk a little bit more about alignment between those two projects in the presentation a little bit later. We've talked a little bit about this already, but our project is really aimed at these goals listed here. We're looking to be assessing flood risks in Charlestown, Navy Yard, and Little Mystic Channel. So looking at where flooding will likely occur and when. Thinking about aligning with those neighborhood projects that we've been kind of mentioning, working closely with National Park Service and separately with the Army Corps of Engineers. Evaluating opportunities and constraints in implementing flood protection design. So like what's really feasible, what are the opportunities for adding community benefits, what are the challenges in constructing these designs and other kinds of things. Creating flood protection tools for property owners, so helping to identify strategies that property owners in the project area can use to address flood risks, and identifying and developing the design for a preferred long-term approach. That means figuring out what the actual flood protection will look like throughout the project area. And it is very important to keep in mind that while the project is aimed at improving flood resilience, risks from flooding can never fully be eliminated, but we're working collectively to design these projects to help reduce those risks to people and property. All right, so just click to the next thing. Here we have a little bit more about the project vision So as we are guided by these goals, our vision is to produce an outcome for Charlestown where communities and structures are protected from near-term and long-term flooding, and the waterfront experience is enhanced and accessible. We know we cannot solve every problem with this project, but our commitment is to stay focused on our project goals in a way that helps accomplish this vision. So with that in mind, we've kind of begun to explore design options for the waterfront and identified some of the key design challenges that we think we'll need to work through with all of you in order to realize that vision. And some of those include, as we said, multiple different property owners working together, also working with the National Park Service where the two projects meet, making sure that the designs align with how Charlestown looks and feels. There's a great character down here on the waterfront, and ensuring that those designs are accessible and ADA compliant. Maintaining access to the waterfront, and what we mean by that is both visually and physically. Protecting businesses that need access to the waterfront like maritime uses, and protecting residents that live along the water's edge. That also means sometimes we're dealing with limited space along the waterfront. So we're looking at making sure those designs fit into that space and also address these challenges. In terms of flood protection, we also need to think through a number of design criteria, which includes the level of protection or what type and severity of flooding a certain design would protect against. So this slide shows a variety of potential elevations for different types of flooding along the shoreline in Charlestown. These are just examples, and we'll be talking more about this as we get into the design phase of our project. But right now, these elevations you see here, with the little plus in front of them, those numbers, those are elevations that are in NAVD 88 as the datum. So present day mean high water is at elevation 4.3. About 3 feet above that is where the present day king tide is at 7.5. And throughout the study area, roughly, approximately, the elevation of the land is located at about 9 feet. A little bit above that, at 9.7 feet, is the 2018 flood of record. I think that was Grayson. And then we are looking at some timeframes out into the future in terms of that 1% annual chance flood or the 100-year flood. So 11 feet, elevation 11 feet, so that's 2 feet above land today, is about where the 2030 flood would be. 12.7 feet is mid-century 2050, and 15 feet or about 6 feet above where we are now standing on land is a 2070 annual chance flood. As Ksenia and others alluded to, the goal right now is to address the near-term flooding, which is this around this 2030 mark. But anything that we design or look at in terms of options would be adaptable to future flood conditions out to 2070. And with that, I want to turn it over to Marit to talk a little bit about what these designs might look like.
Great, thank you, Kate. Hi, good evening. My name is Marit Friedman, and I'm providing project support from the Arcadis team. Our work will build on, refine, and improve the design strategies recommended in Coastal Resilience Solutions for Charlestown Phase 2. We know there's a lot of work to do on these options, and that's the point of this study. The first option we'll be exploring is called Option A, and Option A follows along the waterfront, along the harbor walk to provide comprehensive protection, but requires investment on private property as much of the water's edge is privately owned. Option B follows mostly public rights-of-way, including along First Avenue, but doesn't provide the same level of flood protection as Option A. Going along First Avenue means that option B is more set back from the water's edge and has properties that don't fall behind the area of protection. However, given that it follows public rights of way, it might be simpler to implement. Options A and B each have their own sets of trade-offs that we're going to be exploring with you and get input on throughout this process. These options that I just described are very much starting points. They're conceptual, and we'll be working to make them more detailed over the summer. But today we want to show you a couple of examples of what the design strategies might look like to help you visualize what we're talking about. It's important to note that these images are not proposals for Charlestown. Rather, they are examples of what has been done elsewhere to provide flood protection at both the neighborhood-wide level and at the building level. So the image on the left that you're seeing shows Langone Park and Polo Playground and is an example of a neighborhood-wide flood protection. So that red line that you're seeing shows where the flood protection builds into the park landscape and connects into neighboring sites. And the image on the right shows how property owners for a building can implement different strategies like protecting its critical systems like HVAC or elevating lower interior floors above expected flooding. And work that will come out of this process will help identify strategies that individual property owners in the project area can put in place based on the unique buildings that we have in Charlestown. We actually have a number of examples that have been built out in Boston. The park and playground that you just saw are along the waterfront and have elevated harbor walk, built-in seawall, and ways to move floodwaters faster, and additional features like flood protection and amenities for the community. And Martin's Park on the right includes both climate resilience features like raising the park's edge and features to make the park accessible to people with all abilities. Another example comes from Battery Park City in New York, where the New York State Battery Park City Authority is undertaking an effort to integrate flood protection into the waterfront there. And features include that flood barrier wall system on the right where this orange bubble is, accessible walkways, seating, plantings, and more features to help people enjoy this space while also providing that level of protection that's needed. Examples do already exist here in Charlestown of flood resilience features. Namely, this example comes from Harborview, and the image on the right shows that flood protection can be integrated into the harbor walk through changes in elevations of the walkways. So on the left-hand side of that image, you can see the lower harbor walk that exists closer to the water's edge. And then on the right-hand side, you have the elevated harbor walk, which provides a higher level of protection. And so that lower harbor walk can accommodate some floodwaters, and while accessible on most days, will be able to take on some flooding, and then that higher one provides that additional level of protection. At the building scale, we also have examples right in Charlestown as well. Many of you might be familiar with this building. It's the Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital. And when they designed this building, they did so with flooding in mind. And this includes a number of measures that help reduce the risk to the structure and the patients that it serves. So a few examples are that they raised the ground floor above the projected level of flooding. They elevated mechanical and emergency systems well above flooding levels. The designers did not locate vulnerable uses on the ground floor, and they added plantings and landscape features to help slow the water if there is storm surge and dissipate that energy to have a smaller impact. So I'm going to now turn it over to Pat, who's going to facilitate questions about what Kate and I just talked about.
Great, Maureen, Kate, thank you. Terrific. So first, I want to take a few questions in chat. Then I want to see if there's questions from folks participating tonight about the project's purpose, kind of the approach and timeline. So, but first, I think, and also Ksenia or Rich, you may want to explain the question because it's a little technical, but Diane asked, is Boston listed in a community rating system on the Federal Emergency Management Agency's website? That date is listed as 1997. Is Boston in quote unquote retrograde? Please explain. I don't know what this is. CRS class 10. So Ksenia or Rich, I'll turn that over to you.
Thanks, Patrick. Yes, we are. I can provide more details on the project webpage. The city just recently hired a new floodplain manager, and the city's efforts to address current flooding risks and future flooding risks are recognized, including Article 25, which is the city zoning that reflects the FEMA flood hazard maps, which are periodically updated, and also Article 25A, which is our sea level rise future risk zoning that requires new projects 10,000 square feet or greater to be resilient from coastal storms. But we can provide more details on that in the project webpage, Diane.
Great, Rich, thanks. And then Sarah, I think, has a similar question. She asks, can you provide BCB in addition to NAVD 88?
Yeah, I think that the calculator for that is adding another 6.45 feet to get to Boston City-based BCB. We use NAVD 88 because that is the state's Massachusetts coastal flood risk model measure, but we can ensure that our sort of publicly available materials use both elevations for clarity.
Okay, great. I want to kind of see if there's questions that people want to raise. And again, so I'll turn to Joanne first. And again, just state your name and we'll go forward. So Joanne.
Thank you. I have a question about Massport. I know this project limits are Little Mystic and the Navy Yard, but it's hard to not recognize that Massport owns the waterfront where the Little Mystic is located. So that if they're not at the table and they're not presenting what their plans are, I don't know how you're going to protect Little Mystic, since most of the water that's going to be coming in, other than from the Little Mystic itself, is going to be coming in from the over the Massport land. So I was involved with the advisory group for the 2020 study, and I raised this multiple times. And I understand you can't control it. I understand that this is what you can control, but I don't want to start this without recognizing the threat that is going to happen from the sea level rise that will flood over those the carport and the sand piles. So thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. Other questions or comments about what we presented so far? I know in chat there's a concern that this isn't maybe moving as fast as people had hoped. So we may want to just explain a little bit like the broader plan that was developed, and now this is going to try to advance more closer to design. But I don't know, Rich, if you want to speak to the question about kind of the timing here or the pace.
Yeah, we appreciate that feedback. This is $1 million investment effort on behalf of the planning department to get to a higher level of design. Our goal in this effort is to have a higher level of design, benefit cost analysis, everything that we would need to put into state or federal grants, start seeking funds to building out this infrastructure. But also part of this effort is to develop guidelines for individual adaptation and retrofit. We're not sure when these district scale investments will be put in place. I think that's the biggest concern, is the pace of actually implementing the district scale work. I think meetings like this are good at just bringing awareness of the flooding risks and, just pointing to property owners to take, their own measures to protect their property for those things. So it is a slower pace, but as Brian Sweat says, we have 47 miles of shoreline. In our overview, we're breaking down that shoreline by what is flooding now and what can the city do to protect those areas, and what are the near-term most vulnerable areas, with this 2030 flood level scenario. So we're working in every neighborhood at various levels for readiness to implement these recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Dan, over to you.
Yeah, I want to support Joanne and her position. I too have pushed hard on trying to address the Massport flood risk into the channel space. The direction you still are stuck on is dealing with the south side of the channel space, which in fact you're going to actually create more problems than fix, because you have a watershed from Breed's Hill coming down the hill that will create a flood area from the new partition that you would have to build within the channel space for your new construction of your phase 1, phase 2 concepts, which is a terrible idea. You're also destroying the space. You're also introducing issues within the buildings themselves from light, because that's the north side, so it doesn't get much. So now you're blocking the entry of light. You also break security elements within the buildings because now you just jump over the fence into their properties. That's a bad direction. The better direction and cheaper direction, cheaper is you take advantage of the fence line that already exists on Massport property. You put a berm wall there with a higher fence line so there's less visibility across to them, and you solve not only the short-term but the long-term flood risk, and you put a dam in front of on the harbor side of the Chelsea Street Bridge. That solves your whole flood risk of the entry from the channel space, as well as dealing with the risk of the flood from the Massport side. That is the better direction, cheaper direction. Magic word, cheaper. You're going too far to the wrong direction. You're putting other buildings at risk by the flood risks that you will then create from watershed. Don't do this direction. Go to my direction, the information I've sent you before. It's the right one. I've had engineers help me with it. This
Thanks,
is
Dan.
the wrong direction. Goodbye.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, I think we got a question from Drew in chat, which is where did the Charlestown Navy Yard and Charlestown stand in terms of degree of 30 flood vis-a-vis other areas of the Harbor Walk?
Kate, do you want to bring back the flood paths?
Yeah, where's
Okay.
Marie? Do you mind going back to that?
Is that the one, Rich? Okay, there's 2030, right? Okay, good.
Yeah, here's 2030. So, I mean, it's still, you've still got a large portion of the waterfront here receiving decent amount of flooding and starting into the interior, even at 2030. So, just trying to think. Is the question related to other areas of the Harbor Walk outside of Charlestown?
I think so. It's like maybe the question is how's the Navy Yard's risk compare to, say, parts of East Boston or other parts of Boston, or, in terms of this, and I don't know the city if you even rate it like that, but I'm curious what your thought is there.
Yeah, if memory serves, South Boston has some similarities. East Boston, I think, is a little bit more fringe flooding, even out into the 2030s with some major flood pathways. Trying to think of other areas. Rich, any thoughts there?
In Dorchester, there are 2030 flood paths that enter, into the neighborhood at Tinian Beach and Neponset Circle. I'm not sure if we're hitting the question. I think this person just wanted to know, what areas of Charlestown and the Navy Yard would flood in the 2030 scenario. And this is just an image that would show you that 1% storm with 9 inches of sea level rise of areas that would flood. And this, this image and these materials will be posted on the project webpage at the end of this meeting. So there'll be more details in that source.
Right. And Chris has a question about where is the Charles River Dam and the Mystic Dam heights relative to the flood maps?
I know for the flood path in the
Kate, did Rich just freeze?
Yeah, we just lost
modeling,
Rich. Up
there's
here.
effect beyond 2050, but that's it.
Rich,
Rich,
yeah.
Rich, you just cut out for a sec.
Yeah.
Can you repeat your answer?
Yes, there's a similar study looking at the Charles River Dam for overtopping for longer term um, flood path management. I believe that study, the dam's owned by the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and we can provide more details on that effort.
Okay, great. Maybe one last question. I want to we have some other slides to get to, and we'll open up for more questions after that. And I think people are pressing a little bit on the kind of the risk of the Charlestown, the Navy Yard here, vis-a-vis the rest of the Harbor Walk in the city. And I don't know if you're even able to kind of compare worst. And maybe if you live there and you're flooded, it's worst from your perspective. I don't know, but people are pressing a little bit for kind of the risk here versus other parts of the city. And that may be a hard question to answer.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I know that there's significant risk of if we go to the mid-century and then out to 2070. I think the biggest part here is you'll see that the flood pathway is, if not stopped about 2050 or so, or mid-century, if we don't take some action now, this is where these flood pathways start to connect from the Navy Yard side and the flood pathway that's also coming from Little Mystic Channel. And so you, without cutting those off, you get a significant, more amount of flooding into the interior of the neighborhood here. And so that's why it's a big deal and something to address in this near term fashion.
And this is another factor. I mean, what you're seeing here is just sort of like a bird's eye view are the flood depths. And another thing that we're looking at is what are the elevations of the buildings that are at risk. Newer buildings tend to be at a higher elevation, older ones are more vulnerable. And those are the things that we're looking at. Kate, do we have anything that touches on the flood depths? Just for comparison, with the rest of the city, we're looking at the flood paths, these areas shaded in blue, but more detail on what are the flood depths, and then what are the elevations of the buildings and the critical infrastructure. That's how we determine the risk. Is not just areas where water will be observed, but the structural the structures that are at risk in the critical infrastructure.
And Kate, if we don't have that tonight, that's something as we go forward, we'll want to see if we can,
Yeah, I know we have started to look into that. We may not have it quite ready tonight.
Yeah. So I think we'll note that that's a great question, and we'll try to gather that information up. So when we come back to you with further information, advancement of the design, we'll have some of that information you asked for tonight. Okay, let's go ahead and go through. We have a few more questions, some Slido, and then another time for questions here. So. Okay, back one slide there. Okay, so the next slide we just want to show that we understand that this is a complicated site in terms of stakeholders and property owners, right? So I'm not going to list everybody here, but you all know better than we do in many ways that there's a lot of property owners, there's a lot of individual condo owners, there's residential associations, there's the feds, there's the states, there's NGOs. And we know there's a number of these kind of tenant associations and then kind of neighborhood associations and or condo associations. So we know there's a lot of people to engage and work with. And I think one of our goals is to try to do that as best we can as we move forward. So people kind of are coming along, having a chance to influence and weigh in on the designs and the work as it continues. So we want to also note that there are some other studies going on at the same time, and the intent is to be well coordinated with all of these. So you can see with our flood resilience project, we've done some preliminary work, but really in the beginning of this work, which will go for roughly a year until the winter of 2026. And at that point, again, we hope to have, sort of a pretty clarity on some further design and how we might move forward to an actual project. Simultaneously, the National Park Service is doing a flood resilience study for its property just adjacent to this area. They intend to be done a little bit sooner in the fall, but we'll see how that goes. And they're doing something kind of similar. And the idea is to coordinate, because obviously if these two designs and efforts aren't coordinated from a district perspective, they won't be successful. That's going to be important. As you may know, the Little Mystic Channel Park project is likely to be under construction very soon, and a lot of planning and effort by many of you to make that happen. And so we kind of note that, and the fact that it's getting newly constructed as we think about this longer term design, those thoughts and ideas will be folded in and considered as this project moves forward too. And lastly, harbor wide, there is really the City of Boston Coastal Storm Risk Management Study with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That's a longer term study, kind of representing kind of the whole harbor. And again, the intent is to coordinate with the Army Corps as we move forward there. And the city is trying to work very closely with them to ensure that there's good alignment. Okay, so we have a few more Slido questions we want to ask. We want to have some discussion about those, and then we'll talk about next steps from tonight. So let's go to the next one. So again, join back on Slido. And these are very broad questions. We're going to get into more detail and we'll describe in a bit how we're going to do that as we go forward. But in general tonight, again, you can choose to this time. And this idea here is like, what are the things that are important to you in terms of kind of design elements as we go forward? Want to kind of note these things here and pick two, just kind of see what people's preferences are by using Slido. So again, click on that on your phone or on a URL on your browser. And we want to just kind of get a sense of where people are at with this. And then once we've got the results, we'll show them. So. We'll give people a minute to take a look at this. Okay, we got 20 folks. If we can get a few more up there, that'd be great. And then we'll show the results here in just a second. Let's give everybody a chance to fill it out. All right, we're getting up there. Good. All right, why don't we show the results for tonight? Okay, so for folks who polled tonight, it looks like about 50% want to make sure that the design works really well with existing structures. It's, the waterfront there is a really lovely place. Many of you invest a lot of money in your property. That's your home. So I understand that it wants to work well with existing structures. Makes a lot of sense. Again, that's a very strong result. Next is improved walking paths, and we'll talk more about that as we go forward tonight and beyond about what that means to you all. Looks like more trees for shelter and shade, especially as things get hotter. And then accessible structures primarily means access for a variety of mobility, and also that you're able to get to things or things that you want to do, for instance. So both has to do with kind of American Disability Act compliance as well as general accessibility. People have talked about native plantings, recreational aspects. I think there's some aesthetic concerns here that people have talked about. And then all accessible structures again means, really good access for people with a variety of mobility. And then people have mentioned to some degree, and we've heard that some in some early conversations about public safety as well. Great. All right. Super helpful. Thank you. And this is really helping us understand what is important to you as we go forward with the design. All right. The next slide is one more question. So again, these are at least a few things, and you can put in other, you can say that, and we'll actually have a conversation about that. Like, what else do you want to know more about? And you've already begun to suggest some very specific things in chat. But it might be how much will it cost and who will pay for it? Probably on people's minds, given your concern about your property, as you said in the first slide that we did. You may want to be thinking about what steps your particular building can do now to keep it more flood resilient. You may want to understand more about the kind of reduction tools and choices, or you may want to be interested in kind of some of the aesthetic and landscaping pieces, which can be very important to the quality of the neighborhood. So I'd love to get a sense of where people are at. We'll see if we can get to 30 or so again and see what the results are. And then we'll give a little time for discussion as well. All right, we're almost there. All right, very good. All right, so interesting here. We'll let this see how this goes in the next. We'll watch real-time results here. So it looks like I think there's both a strong interest in how much it will cost and who will pay for it. Understandably, this is a combination of kind of public and private property, and so there's going to have to be thoughtfulness about how that all fits together. I think the second question equally as strong as the detailed flood risk reduction tools and choices. So really a lot of the effort going forward for this project is in fact to put in front of people the various alternatives and choices and details over how this would work and have you all have influence and be able to weigh in on what's possible in terms of moving this forward to an actual design. So both those things make a lot of sense and will be things we'll be working on as we go forward as the team and with all of you. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about what to expect going forward, but I wanted to see if there's any other questions or comments about the project or what we're doing. And there's a lot more to come and a lot more detail to get into as we begin to look at the actual details of design. But we want to kind of lay the general approach out tonight to give you a flavor as we get started and hope this is just the beginning of an engagement with you all to work together to find a good solution. So any other questions, comments people want to make before we talk a little bit about some next steps? And the like. Please just raise your hand, or if you can't find the raise hand function, you can just type your name in chat and I'll call on you. And we're adding some links in chat too, so. All right, well, why don't we go to the next slide? All right, so here's kind of what to expect going forward over the coming months. So the project is, it's got phases, and we want to note that, there's obviously some early data gathering and the like. It's kind of the technical part, but going forward, as this is developed, there's going to be engagement all the way along. So really the phase one is evaluating options in a very broad sense. And then it's going to talk about how you would actually implement phasing, the feasibility assessment of what's actually possible. That's kind of what we'll call exploration. And then in the fall of this year, we'll hopefully get to designs and a range of things that are possible at even kind of the micro scale, I don't know, 300-400 yards, as well as how the whole district would look. And then also some recommended options as we begin to see what makes sense from a technical standpoint, from a feasibility standpoint, from your input and concerns and issues that you will raise as we work together. And then ultimately there'll be a benefit cost analysis to look at the kind of the cost piece, which is of course going to be important to everybody, especially in this time of uncertain federal resources. And then a final decision in the winter of 2025 to help us move forward from that. So again, input, exploration, design options, and choosing a design. Let me go to the next slide, because the intent is all along this design process, there will be periodic public meetings just like this. Sometimes we'll do in person, sometimes we'll actually do them online like this as we begin to show the work, ask for your input and comment on very specific details. There will be at least a design charrette where we actually have our hands-on work with you in person somewhere in the neighborhood to really explore some of the different choices and work together to look at those different choices and what they mean and trade-offs and what people like and don't like and why. And then also as we go along, there's any number of community events, especially over the summer. So we'll continue to try to bring this project forward and engage people on that and get people's concerns and issues. You're already there and we often need to come to you. And so we will do that as well. So that's kind of our plan for engagement all along the way in this design process. Okay, so one question we want to ask, one last Slido question we do want to ask is how you prefer to be engaged. And so, you can choose all these that apply. And if you just prefer in-person meetings and that's what you're going to do, then we want to know that. If you really prefer written information, then let us know that. And if there's something else on your mind, that's fine too. Just put in others. So we'd love to kind of get a sense of how you want to engage. So this is our last Slido question for tonight. And would appreciate your feedback so we know how to really to meet you where you're at. Oh, this might be the same about select one, so you may have to pick a priority here. Sorry about that, but we'll get a sense. And again, we're gonna try to do a variety of things, so this is not mutually exclusive, but we would just want to get a sense of your preferences. Okay, we'll give people just a little bit more time. We definitely want to get your input on this to know how you want to be engaged. All right, well, let's go ahead and show the results as a few more people fill this out. All right, so this is interesting. So virtual meetings are preferred because you can do them from anywhere, often in the comfort of your own home or wherever it may be. So that's a very strong result. So we'll note that. When we do the design charrette, we'll probably need to do that in person, but there's some things we can do online too as we go forward. So very helpful to know. Written information, somewhat important. Small group interactions, a little bit. Community events, sure. But really our strong result here is virtual meetings. So that is very helpful feedback and pretty definitive, at least from the folks who filled this out. All right. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Rich and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you everyone for your time this evening. This was a considerable amount of material that we went through, and we'll be posting the recording of this meeting and our presentation on the project webpage. Our goal here is to develop a higher level of design for flood resilience, building upon coastal resilience solutions for Charlestown Phase 2, which included recommendations for resilient infrastructure, protecting the Navy Yard and the Little Mystic. We are looking at funding sources, whether they're through our own capital planning needs. So there are pieces that we could build in pieces as we're making improvements along the shoreline, or state or federal programs with like a grant readiness level of detail, including benefit cost analysis and decision making. But also these meetings are important on just the awareness of these flood risks and what we can do now, and also what private property owners can do to protect, retrofit, and adapt their own properties, because we have no indication of when we'll be completing these projects. We know that the urgency is there, but the flood risks are getting greater. So we just encourage people to know your zone, where you're at risk, and to make your own investments. So the next step on our part, we're holding some office hours where our team will be out there to answer any additional questions. We'll have the presentation materials available. So we'll be hosting these office hours next week, May 5th from noon to 2 p.m. and then May 7th from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. at Building 114 in the Navy Yard on 16th Street. There's a public meeting room space in that building. And then also the Army Corps study. There's a webinar we are hosting jointly with the Army Corps on May 20th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And the connection of the link here will put you towards the project meeting information. That'll be a virtual meeting as well. And then again, our project webpage has all of this information. We'll be updating it periodically. And happy to take more questions. I know there's some interest in the outer harbor barrier that was studied by UMass Boston. It's not very economically feasible. It doesn't address that there are flood paths that enter through the town of Winthrop, the city of Revere, that there isn't a one-all fix. Storm surge barriers are effective for the storm, but not in the future, where we'll have higher tidal events and daytime flooding throughout the city. In our low-lying areas, Boston has 5,000 acres of landfill, and that's why we're looking at these district scale interventions. We're also looking for the most practical alternatives that do not require landfill or altering shorelines, like filling in coves or other things. In our experience with grant makers, that we have to follow, pretty concise regulatory recommendations. So, there's a practicality in our designs, because we want to move these projects quickly through permitting, and you'll see that in the recommendations that we'll be making. So thank you, everyone. And if there's any other questions, Patrick, out there that we might want to respond to.
Just one for engagement. I think Diane asked because summer is often a time when people are away, is there ability for people to send in comments, suggestions, whatever it is, in some fashion to the city in writing or otherwise if they're not actually physically here? Great.
Then our next slide. So has the contact information for our project lead, Xenia Aquaviva. So any questions you have, please feel free to send those over to her. Throughout this effort, we'll be engaged with you through the end of the year, and hope to see more engagement. We had a great turnout this evening. So again, I appreciate everyone's time.
Great. All right. Well, with that, thank you all very much. We really appreciate it. Got some initial feedback. We have a ways to go, and Ksenia is right there and very capable and engaged with you all. So certainly, if people want to send thoughts and ideas into her, please do. The virtual findings for meetings is strong for us, and that means even if you're not physically here in the summer and somewhere else, you can certainly call into a virtual meeting. So potentially, so we'll take that very seriously as we go forward. All right. Thank you all. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Ksenia. Thanks, Kiris and Brian for joining. And we appreciate it. And we will be in touch and be learning from all of you as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you all.